If you have watched Little People, Big World for any amount of time, you know that the show was never really just about a family. It was about a place. 109 acres of green Oregon farmland, just outside of Hillsboro, with a red barn, a western town, a pumpkin patch, a castle, and a farmhouse that millions of Americans have walked through on their television screens. Roloff Farms, the piece of land that built the Roloff name. The piece of land that millions of fans visited during pumpkin season. The piece of land that 4 Roloff children grew up running barefoot across. And the piece of land that, in the years since 2021, has slowly and quietly torn the Roloff family apart from the inside out. Tonight, on LPBW Update, we are walking through the entire story of the Roloff Farms sale. Every listing, every price drop, every negotiation, every brother who walked away from the bargaining table, every accusation, every public shot fired on Instagram or on a podcast or in a People magazine interview. Because this is not just a real estate story. This is the story of how a property became more powerful than the family that owned it, and how, in the end, the farm broke everyone who tried to hold on to it. Let us start with what the farm actually is, because to understand why the sale is so emotional, you have to understand what the property represents. Matt Roloff bought the Roloff Farms property back in 1990. He paid for it. He cleared parts of it. He built the iconic structures that fans recognize from the show, including the western town, the pirate ship, the castle, and the famous red barn. It was a family farm, but it was always, legally and financially, Matt's farm. He and Amy raised their 4 children there. Twins, Zach and Jeremy, daughter Molly, son Jacob. The kids grew up driving tractors, picking pumpkins, climbing on the structures their father built. The pumpkin season, which became the financial engine of the farm, brought in tens of thousands of visitors every fall. The farm was the backdrop for the show that premiered on TLC in 2006. It was the location of weddings, birthdays, family gatherings, and reality television specials for nearly 2 decades. For most of that time, there was an unspoken understanding inside the family. One day, one of the Roloff sons would take over the farm. The legacy would continue. That was the plan. That was the assumption. That was, for many years, the conversation everyone seemed to agree on, even if quietly. And then Matt and Amy divorced. In 2015, they announced their separation. In 2016, after nearly 30 years of marriage, the divorce was finalized. And one of the most complicated parts of that divorce was the question of what would happen to the farm. Amy owned a portion of the land, Matt owned the rest. In 2020, after years of separation and conversations, Amy made a decision that, in retrospect, would shape everything that came after. She sold her portion of the farm to Matt for $975,000. That sale was documented on the show. It was emotional. It was a real goodbye for Amy. She walked through the property one last time as a co-owner before signing the paperwork that handed full control of the entire 109 acres to her ex-husband. The thing about that sale that fans did not fully grasp at the time is that it meant Amy no longer had any say in what happened to the property. If Matt wanted to sell the farm, if he wanted to leave it to his children, if he wanted to give it to Caryn Chandler, if he wanted to hand it to strangers, none of that was Amy's decision anymore. The farm was, in every legal sense, his alone. And that brings us to 2021, the year that would change everything. By that point, Zach Roloff was the son most clearly positioned to take over the farm. He had spoken openly on the show about wanting to raise his children on the property. He had worked the farm operations. He had, by his own account, been the one most willing to put in the day-to-day work that running Roloff Farms would require. So when negotiations between Matt and Zach began about Zach buying a portion of the farm, fans expected a heartwarming story. They expected the legacy to be passed down. They expected the next generation of Roloffs to take over. What happened instead was a slow-motion disaster. The negotiations broke down. Matt has said in confessionals on the show that he and Zach were in very different camps about what kind of a deal could go down. Matt felt the price he was offering was fair. Zach felt it was not. The numbers being discussed were significant, the terms were complicated, and by the time the dust settled, the deal was off. Zach did not get the farm. He and his wife Tori would later say on their podcast, Raising Heights, that the farm was no longer a happy place for them, that it brought up resentment, that it brought up old feelings, and that they had effectively walked away from the property and from the idea of ever owning it. Zach took his family to Battleground, Washington, and then to the Seattle area. They built their own life, and they made it clear, in multiple interviews since, that they were content with the home they had now, and they were not interested in revisiting the farm conversation. Then came the part that really set the fan base on fire. In May of 2022, Matt Roloff announced on Instagram that he was listing 16 acres of Roloff Farms for sale. 16 acres that included the main farmhouse, the red barn, and most of the structures that fans associated with the show. The asking price was $4 million. The reaction was immediate. Fans were stunned. The other Roloff children were stunned. And Zach Roloff, who had been told repeatedly that he could not afford the farm and that the family deal was off, found out about the listing in real time alongside the rest of the public. He responded in the Instagram comments. He pushed back against his father's framing of the situation. Matt had said in his announcement that his sons did not want the farm. Zach denied that. He said his father's characterization was extremely misguided and false. The family fight, which had been mostly contained to confessional booths and private conversations, was now out in the open on social media for the world to see. The $4 million listing did not sell. The farm sat. And in the months that followed, Matt made the unexpected decision to turn the farmhouse into a short-term rental property. For a period of time, fans could actually rent the iconic Roloff farmhouse on platforms like Airbnb. They could sleep in the house they had seen on television for 15 years. They could walk through the property where so much of the show had been filmed. It was a creative pivot, and it generated income, but it did not solve the underlying problem. The farm was still for sale, just at a different price point and through a different mechanism. Then, in 2023, Matt put it back on the market at a reduced price. That listing also did not sell. And then, in April of 2025, Matt put it on the market for the third time, this time with an asking price of $2,895,000. He gave interviews to People magazine. He posted on Instagram. He said the farm had been a monumental part of his life for over 30 years. He said the legacy property had been shared with millions of viewers through Little People, Big World. He said it held some of the most magical memories and would forever live deep in his heart. He said he hoped the next owner would love it as much as his family did. The reaction from the family was, by this point, exhausted. Zach and Tori, in a June 2025 episode of their podcast, Raising Heights, addressed the relisting directly. Zach said he was honestly hoping the farm would sell quickly. He talked about how things were being dragged out. He talked about the dynamics that had developed, and he said there was no reason for them to go back to the property. Tori added that Roloff Farms was no longer the happy place for her family. They did not really care to be there anymore. Zach acknowledged that it brought up a lot of resentment and old feelings. He talked about how he would have loved his kids to experience farm life, but he believed it was unrealistic now. And that last word, unrealistic, hit harder than maybe any other word said in the entire saga. Because for years, the dream of the next generation of Roloffs growing up on the farm had been one of the most repeated themes on the show. Matt and Amy had talked about it for decades. The kids had talked about it growing up. The fans had assumed it. And in 2025, Zach said it was unrealistic. That was the moment, for many fans, when the farm fight officially ended. Not with a sale, not with a deal, just with a quiet acknowledgement from the next generation that the dream had died. Meanwhile, on the farm itself, something interesting was happening. Jacob Roloff, the youngest of the 4 siblings, and his wife Isabel had moved onto the property. Jacob had taken a complicated path with his family over the years. He had publicly distanced himself from the show as a teenager. He had spoken out about negative experiences from his childhood on a reality television set. And then, in his adult years, he had reconciled with his father in some meaningful ways. He and Isabel had been married on the farm. They had a child. And as Matt was spending more time in Arizona with Caryn, Jacob and Isabel began maintaining the property in his absence. They became, in a real sense, the only Roloffs actually living on Roloff Farms. The irony of that was not lost on the fan base. The son who had been the most publicly critical of the show was now the one keeping the farm alive. Matt has acknowledged this in interviews. He has said that Jacob and Isabel are caretaking the property until it sells. And as of the most recent updates, they remain there. And then, in early 2026, an unexpected development. Jeremy and Audrey Roloff began to publicly hint at the possibility of buying Roloff Farms themselves. In a March 2026 Instagram recap, Audrey acknowledged that she and Jeremy were contemplating the idea of purchasing the farm. She said they felt conflicted. She said they saw the opportunity to choose it again if they decided to sell their current house and make the move. She acknowledged that obviously a lot of healing and moving on had happened since the original family feud. She did not say a deal was imminent. She did not commit to anything. But she opened the door, very publicly, to the idea that maybe, after all these years, after all the drama, after the failed Zach deal, after the relistings, after the price drops, a Roloff might actually buy the farm after all. That post sent the fan base into another round of speculation. Would Jeremy and Audrey actually pull the trigger? Would Matt accept whatever price they could offer? Would Zach feel betrayed if his twin brother got the farm that he himself had been denied? The questions are still hanging. As of this recording, no deal has been announced. The farm, as far as we know, remains on the market. So how do we make sense of all this? How does a family that built its life on a piece of land end up tearing itself apart over that same land? The honest answer is that the farm became something larger than a property. It became a symbol. For Matt, it was a symbol of his life's work. He bought it, he built it, he shaped it. And from his perspective, he had every right to decide what happened to it. He has said publicly that he did not want to give the farm away on terms that did not work for him. He felt the prices being asked were fair market value. He felt his children needed to come up with real money to take over a real business, not just inherit a piece of land because of who their parents were. From his perspective, that was responsible parenting. From his perspective, that was teaching his sons how the real world worked. For Zach, the farm was a symbol of legacy. It was the place he grew up. It was the place he wanted to raise his own children. It was the promise that had been quietly made and remade for years that one day he would take over. From his perspective, his father refused to make a fair deal. From his perspective, his father chose money over family. From his perspective, the relisting at $4 million after the Zach negotiations fell through was an insult. Both perspectives have validity, both perspectives have flaws, and both perspectives are now, in a sense, locked in for the historical record. Neither side is changing its position publicly. Neither side seems willing to do the kind of public reconciliation that would put the issue to rest. There is also the question of Caryn Chandler's role in all of this. As we have discussed in previous videos on this channel, Caryn was widely perceived by the family and by fans as having influence over Matt's farm decisions. Whether that perception is accurate or unfair, it was real, and it shaped the family dynamics in important ways. With Caryn now out of the picture as of July 2025, some fans have speculated that Matt may be more open to family-friendly deals than he was before. There is no public evidence yet that this is the case, but the timing of Jeremy and Audrey's renewed interest in the farm, coming just months after the engagement ended, is at the very least an interesting coincidence. Some fans believe that Matt is now actively looking to repair the relationship with his children, and that selling the farm to Jeremy and Audrey could be the symbolic gesture that puts the family back together. Other fans believe that even if a sale to Jeremy happens, it will create a new wave of resentment from Zach, who would once again be passed over for the property he was most actively involved with for years. What we do know is this: the farm is still for sale as of the time of this recording. Jacob and Isabel are still living on the property. Zach and Tori are settled in their own home in Washington and have publicly said they are not interested in revisiting the farm conversation. Jeremy and Audrey are publicly considering a purchase but have not committed. And Matt Roloff, now single after the end of his engagement to Caryn, is spending more time on the farm and more time with his family than he had in several years. The show, Little People, Big World, ended after 25 seasons. The cameras are gone, the fans are still here, and the farm sits, beautifully and quietly, waiting to see who its next owner will be. Here's what I think this story is really about. It is not about real estate. It is not about pumpkin patches. It is not even really about money. It is about what families owe each other and what they do not. It is about the unspoken promises that get made when parents talk about leaving things to their children and what happens when those promises become uncomfortable to keep. It is about a man who built something with his own hands and felt that giving it away on someone else's terms would erase his life's work. And it is about sons who watched their dad build that thing, who put in their own time and sweat believing they would inherit it, and who felt blindsided when the rules changed. Both are real stories, both are painful, and both are still unresolved. Will the farm sell? It probably will, eventually, either to a developer or to a wealthy family or, in the most fitting ending, to Jeremy and Audrey Roloff, who would bring it back into the family after all these years. Whoever buys it will inherit not just the land and the structures and the pumpkin season operations, but also the memories, the wedding photos, the fan visits, the reality television history, the ghosts of the Roloff family that built the place from the ground up, and the legacy, whatever it turns out to be, of one of the most televised pieces of farmland in American history. So let me ask you, do you think Matt was right to put the farm up for sale on his own terms? Or do you think he owed his sons a family deal? Do you think Jeremy and Audrey should actually buy it? Or do you think that would create new problems for Zach? Do you believe Caryn Chandler influenced the farm decisions? Or do you think Matt always was going to do this on his own? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and I want to know where you stand on this. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to LPBW Update, and ring the bell so you do not miss any of our Roloff family updates. We are bringing you the truth, the timeline, and the full story every single week. And we are doing it without clickbait and without made-up drama. That is a promise. I will see you on the next one.